Streaming has reshaped music. Over 600 million people globally have streaming subscriptions, with most of them paying about $12 a month. And for musicians, it's never been easier to release work into the world.
You can finish something in your bedroom or studio or your tour bus and have it out to millions.
But ease of access doesn't mean things are becoming more fair. Streaming services have so much power and influence.
With a whole new world of corporate middlemen, an already highly consolidated industry has only become even more consolidated.
Music today is a winner-takes-all economy, and the biggest winners of all aren't even musicians.
It just breaks my heart when I see bands thanking Spotify for putting them on a playlist. It's flattering, you get a buzz from it, but also they're robbing you.
They're looting, they're a bunch of thieves.
Spotify CEO Daniel Ek has a net worth of almost $10 billion, while musicians make, on average, fractions of pennies per stream.
Labels, we got you, but do you got us?
It's never been easy to make a living as an artist, but musicians in the streaming era are up against a lot. Mysterious black box recommendation algorithms, unregulated payola-like practices.
That's illegal on the radio. But there are a lot of allegations that this kind of thing happens in relation to Spotify.
Label pressure to pump out social media content in pursuit of viral hit singles, licensing agreements locked up by NDAs, greedy and out-of-touch tech execs who don't understand the labor of making music.
It's not really enjoyable to make music. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of practice. You need to get really good at an instrument or really good at a piece of production software.
A marketplace where they need to compete with unlabeled AI slop and ghost music.
Why would you subject yourself to this garbled, generic shit?
And that's just on the recorded side of things. Corporate consolidation touches most of music's intersecting industries: streaming, live music, publishing. Music is a public good that makes our lives better. But how is anyone supposed to make a living from it in 2025?
I feel like these days there are very few income streams from the music directly. There was a time when I would have said that I'm making most of my money from touring and playing shows, but even that more recently has felt a little less realistic.
I'm Liz Pelle, author of Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Costs of the Perfect Playlist. Over the past decade, I've heard so many stories like this from independent artists about how hard it can be to make any kind of income in the streaming era. So it can be jarring to acknowledge that there's actually so much money in music. In 2024, the global recorded music business was a $29.6 billion industry, according to the IFPI, an international trade organization. Some estimates put the live music market at over $10 billion in 2024 too. And Daniel Ek isn't the only Spotify exec raking in cash. His co-founder, Martin Lawrenson, has become richer than anyone from streaming, with a net worth of $15 billion. Spotify's two co-presidents, Gustav Soderstrom and Alex Nostrom, earned over $14 million and $12 million respectively in 2023, landing them on Billboard's annual list of music's top moneymakers. The list also includes top execs from across the ultra-consolidated live and recorded music businesses. Topping it for 2 of the past 3 years was Universal Music Group's CEO Lucian Grange, whose net worth is estimated to be $250 million. Meanwhile, the UK Musicians Census estimates the average full-time musician's salary to be less than £30,000 a year. Another survey, the 2024 Greater Nashville Music Census, polled roughly 2,500 musicians and found that over 60% of them made very little or none of their income from their recordings. That's in part because of streaming.
Spotify has offices all over the globe, including this one here in New York. They're the biggest music streaming service in the world, with 678 million users and 268 million subscribers across 180 markets. But when Ek and Lawrenson started Spotify in 2006, it wasn't about music. They knew they wanted to generate advertising revenue from some sort of free streaming media content. But what exactly would that content be?
The initial conversations were around building a video streaming service.
Should it be product search, or should it be movies or audiobooks? And then we ended up with music.
Spotify was not the first ever streaming service.
Rhapsody. All the music you want, just $10 a month.
But they were the first to bring streaming to a mass audience. In the early years, the experience of using the service felt more like a search bar. A user would need to know what artist or album they were looking for. Over the years, as Spotify tried to grow its user base, it shifted to become a more curated service, with influential playlists and data-driven algorithmic feeds, aiming to attract not just enthusiasts, but passive listeners, or what the industry calls lean-back listeners. By the mid-2010s, they'd become one of the industry's most important revenue sources. The music business had spent years trying to recover from the financial impact of file sharing, so a narrative emerged. Spotify was saving the music business.
I did this not because I thought we could make a ton of money. I did this because I cared about the problem. I cared about music, and I cared about compensating artists fairly.
Saving the music business isn't the same as saving musicians, though. Spotify claims to be leveling the playing field by diminishing the power of gatekeepers like commercial radio stations and major record labels. But in the streaming era, streaming services have emerged as new types of gatekeepers. Making the modern streaming service a reality required the participation of the majors. Streaming services have to sign agreements with those labels in order to make their catalogs available.
When I started Spotify, I didn't actually know that I needed licenses from record labels. I was like, well, you know, we'll
this
figure
is
it out.
easy, you stream it.
Yeah.
In the early Spotify contracts, that meant the majors got perks like big cash advances, free advertising, and equity. When Spotify launched, it was 18% owned by the major labels. There's so much secrecy in streaming, but how rights holders get paid has become increasingly common knowledge. Streaming services pay rights holders 70% of their revenue. The payments are not made on a per-stream basis, but according to a complex revenue share model known as pro rata. Each rights holder is entitled to a percentage of the eligible royalty pool, according to their individual contract's determination of what the eligible royalty pool even is. It's what Spotify calls stream share. If a major label's catalog accounts for 20% of total streams on the platform in a given royalty period, then they get 20% of the royalty pool. Once a rights holder gets their slice of the pie, they in turn pay out royalties according to their own contracts with their artists. It's a system that rewards extremely popular music or tracks getting infinite replays and punishes almost everyone else.
Artists saying, well, I only get paid X for 1 million streams. But 1 million streams is actually a very, very low amount of streams.
Spotify might pay 70% of its revenue to rights holders, but in reality, most of that revenue goes to major labels and pop stars. Some musicians report earning less than 0.003 cents per stream, but in truth, streaming royalties are so minuscule and complex that most working musicians don't even know how to quantify what percentage of their income comes from streaming.
Are you able to pinpoint how much of your living expenses are paid from streaming?
0.
Yeah, no.
I would say 0.
There's nothing coming from streaming to us.
From our streaming income, we could afford for one band member to not work. We're a 7-piece band. 45% of our back catalogue belongs to us. You know, I'm logging in daily to see how much we've made. There is no logic to when the income is going to come.
For years, artists have been told that the real money is out playing shows. But corporate consolidation makes touring hard too. For touring musicians, like these ones I spoke with last month at the Primavera Sound Festival, nothing is adding up.
It's good trajectory to be playing in Primavera Sound, and Monday we have to work.
And what are your jobs?
Like on Monday, I am at the office. I am a graphic designer.
And I'm trying to work as a public job. It's like you have to study and make exam.
We got signed when I was like 17. And like even in that moment, I was like, is this a career? How does this become a career? Like I went to college because I had no idea what a career would look like.
Our living expenses covered by Spotify, I would say very little.
I remember when we were on Interscope for a minute, asking an executive on the telephone to help me understand the breakdown of it, and he was like, you know what, I'm gonna, give me 1 second, I'm gonna find the answer for you. And then he just left the phone, and then like a half hour later, I was like, oh, I just got ghosted.
Yeah, exactly, by someone who allegedly knows and was kind of like, yeah!
I think that the industry was always an exploitative industry well before we were born. but people used to be able to sell records, and that was a real thing.
You could go on tour behind that and sell more. And there was a path, I think, for people who weren't like propped up by a gigantic label to make some sort of living off of it.
You gotta make a choice. You don't get to have it all. You gotta make a noise.
Nandi Rose, the musician also known as Halfwave, and her longtime collaborator, Zubin Hensler, are these kinds of musicians. Not longing for pop stardom, but dedicated to making a living from the craft for over a decade. People come to their 250 cap shows, buy physical copies of their records, they're critically acclaimed even, and yet it's become harder and harder every year. They're precisely the types of artists whose labor is illegible to the current streaming model.
I remember my mom saying to me, like, all right, we're gonna figure out how to get one of your songs to go viral. And I was like, Mom, that's not really how it works. Or I certainly don't want to be sitting down thinking about how to make one of my songs go viral. It's just not how I want to spend my one precious life. I don't really want to be a content creator. That's not what I signed up for.
It does seem like this system is working well for the people who are having really broad success. But I think for me, and even like the level of success that a lot of my peers shoot for, we sort of exist in the like 300 cap rock clubs, and filling one of those feels like enough.
In 2017, something unexpected happened for Zubin's old band, the Westerlies, and it illuminates a lot of what's wrong with streaming culture. This was during what a former Spotify employee once described to me as the peak playlist era, a period in the streaming era before the dominance of hyper-personalized algorithmic feeds, where official Spotify-owned, editor-curated playlists carried a lot of weight in how musicians connected with listeners and how they monetized their recordings. That January, the band's song A Nearer Sun was added to an official playlist called Soft Focus.
We immediately got 1 million streams. It was a very funny experience because it was by far our most soft, our most gentle, our most like dynamically restrained track. But we really experienced the thing of like, oh, should we make more music like that? And we decided no, because that wasn't the music we wanted to make. But we totally felt the pressure, and I feel like I remember receiving like $1,000 or something as my share of whatever was happening with that track, which didn't substantially help the band in any way, the money that we got from getting 1 million streams.
That Soft Focus playlist was eventually rebranded as Instrumental Guitar Focus, and not only renamed, but entirely flooded with music by what the public has long called fake artists or ghost artists. It's this sort of sterile stock music by anonymous artists that often fills up playlists for sleeping, chilling, and studying. While researching my book, I uncovered that these tracks are part of an internal cost-saving scheme at Spotify, and they even have a name for it, Perfect Fit Content, or PFC. Spotify essentially strikes licensing deals with production companies, who in turn commission session musicians to crank out a high volume of stock tracks suited to certain moods and playlists, all with improved margins for Spotify. Playlisting this music saves them money, but working artists, like the Westerlies, are missing out.
My sort of dream vision for where we end up with Spotify would be that we will give you that perfect song for every moment of your life.
The rise of PFC had stark implications for the rise of generative AI music. When streaming services are always in search of whatever content they can deliver to users at the cheapest cost, what could come next? For years, it's felt like a looming, far-off threat, but now it seems to be arriving. By one account, upwards of 10,000 fully generative AI tracks are released to streaming services every day. The popular thinking in the biz has been that this material won't interest most users, that AI music will fail to generate streams. So then how do you explain something like this?
This band, the Velvet Sundown, going absolutely viral on Spotify, and well, it's an AI-generated band.
The band also appears to have an IG account, although all of the photos very much look like AI.
Some streaming services are claiming they won't add this AI music to editor-made playlists. But several reports pointed out that these particular tracks were surfacing for some users via their algorithmic Discover Weekly feature. And the attitude from streaming services largely just seems to be one of indifference to the impacts of AI and more generally to the labor that goes into making art.
It used to cost a lot of money to make music. If you look at it right now, the recording of music ends up becoming fairly cheap today in most instances because anyone can record if they have a laptop and a mic.
Spotify can say the cost of making content is close to zero when they're engaged in these practices of boosting material that costs next to nothing to make.
We have changed, obviously, what culture is and what consumption is.
There is so much labor that goes into making music. The labor of writing, practicing, recording, mixing, mastering, and so much of that labor gets diminished with streaming.
Creating art is a crazy thing to kind of quantify because everyone's process for it is so different. There's a lot of records that I love that were made for almost no money, but that doesn't mean that the cost of making content is almost zero. You know, those still took time.
Just thinking about all the labor that goes into making music and putting it out there and performing it. As musicians on tour, you're really getting paid for 23 hours of the day. When you finally just get to play the show, that's the sweet stuff. The job is all of the labor that goes into every other hour of the day that is really challenging on your physical and mental health.
There's a very big difference between having a budget to rent a studio, pay for the electricity in that studio, pay for the engineers, pay for the community of musicians, and it's qualitatively different experience and recording that comes out of like a community versus like a laptop. I know that there's like wizards on like the bedroom recording front, but like we lost something in the process. Like simply putting food in a greater amount of creative people's mouths. There was a period of time when we were getting a lot of attention. And forgive me, it was gross every time. People would say, oh, you're a rock star.
Yeah.
And I would always say, I'm a working musician.
Yeah, we got a job. Like we got, considering the other jobs that we have had, this is currently a steady job. It's a weird life.
Yeah. And labor is labor. And
labor is labor, of course.
Labor should be honored.
We signed to a record label when we were like 6 months old as a band. So we got a big advance from a record label and we got a big advance from a publishing company. And that served us well for the first few years, but we never lived up to the hype and to the record sales that were expected of us. So we're self-releasing now. We've been self-managed for, I think, 10 years now. One of the earliest conversations I remember when we entered the music industry and we started working with a manager was we sat down at a meal, which they paid for very graciously, of course. That's what happens in the early days. And then we're talking like percentage, and they were like, our cut would be 20%. We were like, well, we're a 7-piece band, so that means that your cut would be bigger than any of the band members' cut. That doesn't seem right to us. And they were just like, no, that's how it works. It's 20%. People should know that you don't have to say yes to everything.
Yeah, you can say no.
Yeah, you can say no.
Artists increasingly are saying no, though. Take the example of the long-running independent art rock band Deerhoof, who removed their music from Spotify this month in protests of investment into the AI military weapons company Helsing. Many musicians are with Deerhoof, simply preferring that their music not help fuel the war machine.
At the end of the day, what we want is these military contractors out of our cultural spaces.
Eck is undeterred, though. In response to the criticism of the investment, he doubled down, saying, I'm sure people will criticize it, and that's okay. Personally, I'm not concerned about it. I focus more on doing what I think is right, and I am 100% convinced that this is the right thing for Europe. Spotify isn't the only streaming service with connections to the military-industrial complex, but these are in part the stakes of continuing to allow music to not just be subject to this much corporate consolidation, but financialization, and the whims of billionaires who are just trying to grow their wealth through music. Like elsewhere in the economy, some governments are turning to a familiar related idea, taxing the rich. In Canada, for example, the government has introduced a so-called streaming tax of digital service providers, meaning streaming services must pay 5% of their profits into a fund that supports the creation of Canadian content. A similar policy has been implemented in France. Those aren't the only regulations that could offer a political counterweight to inequality in music. Alongside US Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, the United Musicians and Allied Workers have introduced the Living Wage for Musicians Act, which would create a new royalty paid directly from the streaming services to artists. In the EU, a commission is currently exploring whether streaming services should come with fairness labels. And that's all not to mention all of the work grassroots music communities are doing right now to build cooperative digital infrastructure for music that would actually serve working musicians.
The problem we have with music isn't a music-focused problem, right? It's a systems-focused problem. It's about technology coming in completely unregulated with capital and determining how to build systems that were best for them and worse for other people. And I feel like the artist's experience can be very informative in humanizing that extraction, that loss, that sort of devaluation. And there may be an enormous opportunity to come together to talk about what we actually want to do with the abundance we have in the world right now that's not being shared fairly.
When it talks to me, I better listen to whatever's coming out. When it comes through me, I better get out of the way it's coming up.
We've been so kind of corralled into thinking that there's one end game, which is to go viral and have our music exist in this one realm and be really popular there. But Spotify, it's only made for one kind of artist. It does not represent so much of the kind of music that people are making and why they're doing it. And yet we've all been funneled through this same system.
It's not charity work, but I really do believe in and I don't mean this in any organized religion sort of way, but as a spiritual endeavor, we have the ability to process the world. I think everybody does, to process the world and kind of translate it into, if it's music or art or writing something that can bring people in and pull them out of a depression. And I think that's a very important thing. It's just as important as, therapy or the dentist, so I feel like it's work.
Music is important, but right now it's also in crisis, and musicians have been sounding the alarm for years and years. There are so many different perspectives on what exactly is the root cause of the problem and how to address it. But what most everyone can agree on is that it shouldn't be this hard to make a living from music. A better music world is possible. It's time to help build it.
When it comes through me, when it comes through me,